Hello and welcome back to the channel. Last time I said that we were going to start on athletics sections, but something exciting happened, which is that Paizo came out with their latest book, Lost Omens, Impossible Lands. So Impossible Lands focuses on the two nations, Geb and Nex, which were both founded by supremely powerful archmages and were at war with each other for over 1,000 years, creating an incredibly magic and war-torn wastes of these two nations, uh, leading us now into the modern day. However, what I'm more interested in is in the player options that come with the book, and of that there are plenty. For one, we have 5 entire new ancestries, we have a new animal companion, archetypes, information on deities, equipment, a whole bunch of feats, hazards, extra monsters, rules about wild magic, new Gunslinger Way, and in a adventure path that came with Possible Lands, there's a new Oracle Mystery. So obviously I can't cover everything that is introduced in this book. That should be here for hours and hours. What I will do is I'm going to hit on the major options of the ancestries, the new subclasses, the new archetypes introduced in the Impossible Lands. To kind of give a brief overview, pick out a few of the features that I think are most interesting, and kind of summarize my opinion on each of the new player options. So let's start with ancestries, and the first one on our docket are the Goron. This rare ancestry are essentially plant people similar to Leshies, however, where Leshies are closer to animated or awakened plants, these Gorons are essentially fully self-sufficient individuals that just happen to take the form of people. Something I think is really neat about the Gorons is their cycle of life and death, which is actually pretty close to the Phoenix, at least thematically. Whenever a Goron dies, they'll basically take their soul and grow it into a seed, which they then plant, and that seed will grow into a new Goron, inheriting the old Goron's memories and personality, but changing it just a little bit. So it's not an exact clone, but much closer to a parent-child relationship might be. So here are the Goron's base mechanics. For the most part, pretty generic. The one thing of note is they have photosynthesis similar to a Leshy. Instead of eating food, they are plants, so they consume sunlight. And you can buy bottled sunlight. It is very expensive, but unless you're going to be spelunking for days on end, you can simply chill out in the sun and get all your nourishment that way. Moving on to their heritages, and the one I want to call out is the Thorned Rose, which basically allows you once a day, as a reaction upon being hit in melee, to deal retaliatory, piercing, and persistent bleed damage to whoever's attacking you. As for the feats, there are two kind of feat categories I want to discuss. The first is building upon that Thorn Rose heritage, first with Murderous Thorns, which allows you to use that reaction retaliatory attack once per hour instead of once per day. And then at level 13, Look But Don't Touch allows you for 2 actions to emit poison for a minute, and whenever you're hit in melee, the attacker will automatically take 3d6 poison damage. The next set of feats I want to look at is skill related. It starts with Ancient Memories at level 1, which gives you a floating train skill proficiency which you can switch out every day. Then at level 9 that becomes a floating train and a floating expert skill proficiency. However, the really interesting part about this is when the effect expires, so at the end of the day, you can actually retrain a skill increase. So instead of you being temporarily trained in, for example, stealth, at the end of the day, if you were trained in performance and you want to remove that and become trained in stealth, you could put your ancient and endless memory temporary proficiency into stealth and then retrain your performance proficiency, so lose proficiency in performance and become proficient in stealth. I don't think this has existed before in PF2, where you can just permanently switch out skill increases. These floating temporary skill proficiencies have certainly existed and are somewhat common, but being able to permanently swap out your actual training so you can be trained in 5 skills and then 5 days later be trained in 5 completely different skills is not something I think we've seen before. I think is pretty neat. And then just for completion's sake, at level 13, this leads to eternal memories, which is once a day as an action, you can just move your floating proficiency around, which is pretty standard for these kind of floating proficiency skill chains. So overall, the guards I think are pretty neat. They introduce a couple things that have not really been seen much before in PF2. Obviously, the permanent retraining every day, but also the Murder's Thorns and Liquid Don't Touch can possibly create some kind of interesting Thorns build, quite literally a Thorns build, where you deal damage to the enemy, at least in part by having them attack you and take retaliatory damage. I'm not sure if that's something that's really supported by the rest of the system, but regardless, it's cool that there is at least some support, some options for that kind of effect. Next up we have the Kashrishi, which, even though the pictures depict them as rhinoceros, they're actually psychic, halfling-sized bug people whose psychic abilities are so strong that they can actually reshape their generations to adapt to whichever environment they happen to find themselves in. The Kashrishi, of course, are small, and they have two fairly interesting innate abilities. First, empathic sense, which basically gives them an imprecise blind sight within 15 feet, so long as they aren't dealing with a mindless creature. And also glowing horn, which is whenever they do something occulty or something related to their ancestry, their horn glows a little bit and emits dim light in a 10-foot emanation. As for interesting options, it starts straight away at level 1 with tough skin, which turns your skin into medium plate armor that has +4 added AC and a dex cap of +1. And because it's your skin, you can never be disarmed from your armor. Which means if you happen to be in a campaign where your DM likes to ambush you at night, where you normally wouldn't be able to sleep in plate armor, or you often get captured or stripped of your gear, Tuscan says, nah, even if I'm a strength-based character who usually wants to wear medium or heavy armor, I'm still going to get my full armor benefit, and there's nothing that anyone can do to take that away from me, short of, I guess, skinning you alive. Second, at level 5, well, of potential, once a day you just regain a focus point, which I think might be the first time an ancestry feat can give you back a focus point. So this is really good for any focus point based caster, effectively increasing your maximum focus pool by 1 for the day. And finally, at level 13, we have a really strange feat, Reimagine. This lets you cast Dreaming Potential as an innate occult spell, and you can cast this spell targeting yourself and still gain its full benefits. Dreaming Potential allows you to basically use the retraining option while you sleep. Retraining rules are listed elsewhere in PF2. Basically, you spend a defined amount of time to be able to retrain class choices. So you can retrain class feats, you can retrain ancestry feats, skill feats, journal feats. If your class allows you to choose at some point, for example, choosing a subclass, you can retrain your subclass, and so on and so forth. This allows you to spend your days doing whatever you like, including adventuring, and then spend your nights fast asleep and fully retrain your entire build if you want to. Overall, Kurshishi I think are very neat, and they especially shine at injecting a little more spellcastering into your character. Not only from the potential level 5 giving you an extra focus point, but also because you have a whole feat chain of innate occult spells I didn't cover, which culminate at level 17 into granting you teleport as an innate occult spell which you can cast once a day. Additionally, tough skin with giving you medium armor on your body permanently, that for all intents and purposes is medium armor that cannot be removed, is very cool and hasn't really been seen before in the PF2 system. Next we have the Nagachi, an uncommon ancestry, and these are snake people. Half snake, half people. Fairly straightforward. And for the general mechanics, there's nothing super interesting that they get. They get a Fangs unarmed attack, but it doesn't really have that interesting traits, so overall, fairly standard in terms of overall mechanics. The Nagashi do have a couple of interesting heritages, starting with the Hooded Nagashi, which grants you a ranged unarmed attack. It does only have a range of 10 feet, but does deal poison damage and persistent poison damage on a critical hit. The other one I want to call out is the Titan Nagashi, which, similar to the Kashishi feat we saw previously, grants you medium armor as your skin. Your scales in this case become medium plate armor, which have a +4 item bonus to AC, dex cap of +1. Next up we have the Nagashi feat, starting at level 1 with Serpent's Tongue, granting your Nagashi an imprecise scent with a range of 30 feet. And an imprecise scent obviously can't make a target observed, but what this does mean is now no creature can hide from you within 30 feet of you unless they're somehow disguising their scent, because with this imprecise scent, you always know the exact square they're standing on. Obviously, you'll still have that basically 50% mischance from concealment because they'll be hidden. However, just knowing that something is in this square is still extremely valuable and can save you actions searching and can save you from being stuck up on an ambush. Next at level 9 we have Envenom Strike, and once per 10 minutes you can envenom a weapon, which allows it to deal 2d6 extra poison damage on its next hit. However, the really, strange thing about this is you can envenom a weapon within 30 feet, which I think is just a really hilarious visual, where you could be standing at the back lines and your fighter's about to attack an enemy with his weapon, and you can just send a, cruise missile of poisoned fang venom out from your mouth, travel 30 feet across the battlefield, and land on your fighter's sword and properly envenom it so that they can attack. And the final thing I want to call it is Disruptive Stare at 13, which, as a reaction, whenever someone within 30 feet of you attempts to cast a spell with a concentrate trait, you can force them to make a will save, and on a failure, they get a -2 to their attack rolls and DCs, and on a critical failure, their spell is disrupted, meaning they lose the action spent to cast the spell, and the spell is completely negated. Now, notably, any spell with a verbal component has the concentrate trait, and almost every spell, and certainly almost any offensive spell that's being cast against you in combat, is going to have that verbal component, and thus is going to have the concentrate trait. So even though you can only do this against a single creature once a day, this is still whenever a creature attempts to cast a spell against you, the first time it happens, they have to make a will save or either be severely crippled for that spell cast or lose that casting of the spell entirely, which for an ancestry feat is really quite good. So overall, Nagashi, as can probably be expected, has a lot of focus on poisons in their ancestry feats, but also just overall a lot of pretty decent supportive options, especially supporting allies with things like Envenom Strike and protecting them with things like Disruptive Stare. Next we have the Venora, another uncommon ancestry, and these are basically monkey people. In terms of their general abilities, once again, overall pretty standard. However, they do get prehensile tail, which allows your tail to perform interact actions that require free hand. It obviously doesn't have fingers, so it can't use significant manual dexterity, and you can't use it to hold items. But anything that doesn't fall under those two restrictions, such as reloading weapons or activating magic items, are totally fair game for your tail to do. In terms of feat, unfortunately, there's not a lot interesting. There's a decent amount of feats that are kind of setting specific, such as gaining benefits in like forest and jungle environments, which makes sense for a monkey. However, there are 3 feats: climbing tail, skillful climber at 5, and dangle at 9, which improve your ability to climb just in general, and eventually allow you to hang from perches, using your tail, effectively freeing up all 4 of your other limbs to use as you wish. So overall, that's kind of it that interested me in particular. There are other feats, of course. There's some focused on stealing stuff and creating mischief, but on the whole, there's not a ton that the Venara does that's exciting to me personally. And the last of the new ancestries are the Vishkanya, another rare ancestry, and this is another take on snake people. Similar to the Naga, instead of being half snake, half person as the Naga are, the Vishkanya are much closer to kind of an interblending of snake and human, where they're humans with snake scales and innate toxins and so on and so forth, but not nearly as obvious as having a snake body like the Naga do. So overall, the Vishkanya once again have pretty standard general abilities. However, they do have something very interesting, which is this innate venom, where once a day you can envenom a weapon and basically put a contact poison on it. The contact poison will use your DC, either class or spell DC, and overall, it's not super strong, but it is a 1 round poison, so every single round, your opponent will need to make saves or take even more damage from this contact poison that you get free as part of your ancestry. And this innate venom can be improved in a variety of ways, starting immediately with one of their heritages, the key envenom Vishkanya, where your envenom action doesn't trigger reactions that normally trigger on a manipulate, and you can draw a weapon and envenom it as a single action. Not only that, but there's a whole slew of ancestry feats which makes your envenom action better. Lesser enhanced venom at 1, moderate enhanced at 9, and greater enhanced at 17 all increase both the damage that your envenom does and increases the frequency which you can use it, going from once a day at default all the way down to once a minute with greater enhanced venom. Next, debilitating venom at 5 and stronger debilitating at 13. Adds debuffs onto your venom stages on top of just dealing normal damage. So now when your opponent is envenomed, they'll be taking this constant poison damage, but also, for example, reducing damage die and becoming clumsy, or for the normal debilitating venom, taking speed penalties or becoming flat-footed. On top of all this, we have Swift Application level 9, which allows you to envenom your weapon and immediately strike with it, and Vicious Venom at level 17, which turns your venom into a virulent venom, meaning your opponent must save twice consecutively in order to actually improve from their envenomed condition. So overall, Vishkanya obviously has other feats not to do with their venom ability. However, they have the whole suite of venom abilities is there for the taking, and I think is quite possibly the most interesting thing to come out of Impossible Lands that at least I have read. Depending on the feat you take, you can have an envenom ability that you can use effectively once a combat that deals constantly taking poison damage, debuffs your enemies, and forces them to make multiple consecutive saves in order to rid themselves of the venom. I feel like I've said this a lot in this review already, but I'm not sure if there's anything that's been available like this in the PF2 system prior to Impossible Lands. And this is really interesting and makes me really want to make a Visconti character and see how much mileage I can get out of that envenom weapon ability. Now that we've gone over all the ancestry options, let's take a quick look over the other options available to us in Impossible Lands, starting with the new subclasses. First, for the Gunslinger, we have Way of the Triggerbrand, which is the subclass you want to choose if you want to use combination weapons, i.e. if you want to wield a gun sword, or a pistol knife, or what have you. Way of the Triggerbrand is the way for you. Starting straight off the branch with touch and go, you can, for a single action step, switch your combination weapon from ranged to melee or melee to ranged, and reload. Your initial D, which you get at level 1, allows you at the start of combat to draw your weapon and in your first turn, ignore any attacks of opportunities that would come from using your combination weapon. Your advanced deed at 9th allows you to, when you make your melee strike with your combination weapon, also perform a thievery check with a -5 to attempt to make your opponent flat-footed. And at level 15, your greater deed, Break Them Down, allows you to attack twice, once as a melee strike and once as a ranged strike with your combination weapon. And if they both hit, you deal 2d6 persistent bleed damage and dazzle your opponent for as long as they are bleeding. In addition to the new way, we have 2 feats to support this, starting at level 6 with the Triggerbrand Salvo, which allows you to, for a single action, make a melee strike, and if it hits, immediately make a ranged strike with the same combination weapon, and give that ranged strike a +2 circumstance bonus to its attack roll. And at level 14, we have Triggerbrand Blitz, which allows you to stride and make up to 3 attacks with a combination weapon, either melee or ranged at any point during that stride. So overall, Triggerbrand I think is a welcome addition. Prior to Impossible Lands, combination weapons really were kind of terrible. There just wasn't really a good reason to use them, especially because Drifter existed, which allowed you to wield a melee weapon in one hand and a ranged weapon in the other. However, it does take some kind to turn a line, and the real power of the subclass, in my opinion, comes from Triggerbrand Salvo, which you can't pick up until level 6. The next subclass we have is the Ash Mystery for Oracles, which overlaps a decent amount thematically with the Flames Mystery. However, while Flames focuses more on the act of burning, Ash focuses more on what's left after the fire has subsided. For your benefit, you gain immediately resistance equal to half your level against all physical damage, and a +2 to your saves and DCs against being grappled, being shoved, or being forcibly moved. Your curse, starting on a minor curse, grants you a -1 to your con-based checks and reduces your speed by 10 feet. And your moderate curse causes you to be forcibly dazzled and also emit an ash cloud in a 10-foot emanation, which conceals anyone inside of it. And your major curse grants anyone inside that ash cloud weakness to fire equal to half your level, and if anyone inside is killed by fire damage, their body immediately collapses into ash. And as always, Ash grants 3 specific focus spells for your Oracle, starting in level 1 with Ashen Wind, which sickens enemies in a 10-foot burst depending on a fortitude save. At level 6 with the Advanced Revelation feat, you can pick up Incendiary Ashes, which deals slashing damage to creatures in a 20-foot burst and gives them weakness fire. And finally, Ash 4 for the Greater Revelation feat at level 12 grants you fast healing, resistance to piercing and slashing damage, and immunity to bleed, falling, and persistent damage. Overall, I think Ash is somewhat interesting. The physical resistance is big game since probably the vast majority of the damage you take is going to be some kind of physical damage. However, the rest of the mystery kind of pulls at each other a little bit. For example, the Moderate Curse really wants you to kind of sit with your allies since they're going to be concealed, and notably, this doesn't have the common line of text that's present in other effects like this, where creatures outside the cloud are concealed to those inside the cloud. So even though you're going to be concealed to your enemies will not be concealed to you. However, the Major Curse causes everyone in the aura to gain weakness to fire. So your Minor Curse wants you to surround yourself with your allies, and your Major Curse wants you to surround yourself with your enemies, which is kind of a little weird. Additionally, Ash Form, which is a pretty decent focus spell, just grants you a ton of defensive options, also grants you resistance to piercing and slashing damage, which will not stack with the physical resistance you get innately as an Ash Oracle. Overall, I think Ash probably works best if you can get a party that's full of people who deal fire damage, especially if you can get up to your Major Curse and live on the front lines surrounding bring your enemies into your Ash Cloud, and also with your Incendiary Ashes focus spell, you can inflict a lot of weakness to fire on your enemies, which if 2 or 3 of your allies can deal fire damage with their attacks, that's a lot of free extra damage that you're getting just from basically existing on the battlefield. Finally, let's look at the 2 new archetypes available in Impossible Lands, starting with Jelmari Heavenseeker, which is actually dependent on the Student of Perfection archetype first. Your dedication comes at level 4, it does require you to be a Student of Perfection, and in exchange, you get trained in either acrobatics or cultism, as well as Key Rush or the Key Strike Monk feat. These are both key spells. Key Rush allows you to spend a focus point to move and ignore attacks opportunity, where Key Strike allows you to spend a focus point to flurry of blows and deal a little extra damage. Overall, the Heavenseeker archetype is flavored as kind of a very flighty, storm-based, unarmed striker. They feats like Heaven's Thunder level 6, which allows you to deal additional electricity and sonic damage on your attacks, or Skyseeker at level 8, which allows you to leap at and strike at your enemies, and as you advance higher level, continue that chain, leaping and striking between enemies on the battlefield. In general, I probably wouldn't take Heavenseeker on anyone who isn't a monk, as a lot of their feats are dependent on taking unarmed strikes, and a decent amount of them reference improvements if you have similar or related monk feats. However, if you are a monk and you want to be kind of a bringer of storms, Shamari Heavenseeker is a pretty cool additional option for you to do that. And finally, we have the Shield Marshal archetype, who are basically the law enforcement of Alkenstar. At level 2, their dedication grants you training in society and a couple of free skill feats. However, the archetype in general is pretty lackluster. There are only 3 feats in it, and only one of them is relevant for a campaign that doesn't have tech options readily available. The level 4 feat, Consolidate Overlay Panopticon, literally implants a panopticon into your eye, which takes the information you're seeing and feeds it back to a central database. This is kind of the overall vibe with the archetype, and unless you're literally specifically playing as a shield marshal in Alkenstar, it's going to be pretty difficult to fit this dedication into anywhere else. Overall, the highlight of the Impossible Lands, as expected, are the 5 new ancestries available to players now. They are all uncommon and rare, but they all bring something new and cool and unique to the table that was difficult or even impossible to get previously. My personal favorite, as you could probably guess, is the Vishkanya with their whole invented weapon line. That's something that I could seriously see myself making a unique character around and really having a lot of fun with that specific ancestry ability. However, of course, these are just my opinions, and I would encourage you, if you're at all interested in something in the possible lands, to go and read over it yourself. I skipped over a lot of options for the sake of brevity, and just kind of hit the ones that excited me personally, but there's a lot of options in here available for a wide variety of players, and what may excite me is certainly not going to be exactly the same as what excites you to build in a character. So thanks for watching this video. I had a lot of fun reading through everything in the Impossible Lands. And certainly there's a few equipments and spells that I'm really excited to try out in my characters. So next time we're gonna go back to the skill deep dives, try and get that series wrapped up. So look forward to that. But until then, thank you for watching, and I hope you have a lovely day.